Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this week we are doing another tag video. This is the most underrated horror tag, and this is created by myself. And, yeah, the whole thing is all about underrated horror films. What's your favorite underrated horror films? So it's made up of 9 questions, so let's get to it, shall we? The first question is, what is the most underrated horror film of the past 20 years? So for me, it's going to be Sinister, which I just thought was a really good film. I thought it was really solid, really well directed, very scary, with great suspense, great cast all around, great performance by Ethan Hawke. And I feel like the film gets a lot of crap, a lot of people don't like it. It seems to be people either love it or hate it, but I feel like it deserves a lot more love. I really, really enjoyed the film. Number 2 is, what is the most underrated slasher film of all time? And I'm going to go Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. This movie is just criminally underrated, in my opinion. It's just brilliant. It's absolute genius. It's equal parts horror and comedy. It does both beautifully. It's both hilarious and scary, and it's got some great slasher elements and some slasher kills and a great slasher look for the killer, And the killer is very charismatic and iconic, basically, and you got a great cast, and you got Robert Englund in there just killing it. I just absolutely love it. It's such a great movie. Number 3 is, what is the most underrated horror director of all time? Who is the most underrated horror director of all time? And I'm going to say Tom Holland. He made this classic here, Child's Play, and this classic here, one of my absolute favorite vampire films of all time, Fright Night, and of course Child's Play I'm talking about. He also wrote one of my favorite horror sequels of all time, Psycho 2. Yeah, he's the one that had the balls to come up with the screenplay for Psycho 2, sequel to one of the greatest horror films ever made, which had been made, I don't know, 30 years previously, or 25 at least. Yeah, just an underrated director, I think. Number 4 is going to be, who is the most underrated actor of all time in horror genre? And I'm going to say Jeffrey Combs, from Reanimator and so many other great horror films. I've said it many times, Jeffrey Combs is my favorite horror performance of all time. His performance in Reanimator is my favorite performance in the history of horror films. Just absolutely brilliant. And he's done a lot of other great horror movies like From Beyond. He's been in Trances 2. He was in a movie called Night of the Living Dead 3D, which I actually really enjoyed. It was a movie called Brutal, which I really enjoyed, where he played the sheriff, and that film was like a brutal kind of slasher movie. I really enjoyed that. He was in Dagon, so many other, Bride of Reanimator, of course, Beyond Reanimator, and just so many others. Awesome actor. I love him. He's also done a lot of voice work in like cartoons and things like that. And he's done a lot of guest appearances on stuff like Star Trek, and just a great career. Highly underrated actor. And who is the most underrated actress of all time in horror? That's question number 5. And strangely enough, I'm going to pick Barbara Crampton, also from Reanimator and From Beyond, and Castle Freak, which also had Jeffrey Combs as well. I just think she's a great horror actress, and she's done a lot of classics, And she was also in Chopping Mall. She was also had a big comeback with You're Next, another great kind of slasher, kind of home invasion film, and she was fantastic in that. And she was in the Rob Zombie film Lords of Salem. So yeah, she's made a big comeback as a lead. Beyond the Gates, which I really enjoyed. She was great in that. And she was actually great in the film Death House, which was one of the most disappointing horror films of last year, 2018. But I loved her in it. I thought she was fantastic. The film was filled with horror legends all over the place, but it seemed like all of them were just cashing paychecks. But for some reason, Barbara Crampton just took it seriously. You could tell she actually thought she was in a good movie or something, but she actually gave a great performance, and I was like captivated by her, and I think she was the only good thing about that movie. So yeah, Barbara Crampton is the most underrated in my opinion. Number 6 is, what is the most underrated horror sequel of all time? Ooh, that's a tough one, huh? There's so many of them. But I'm going to have to go with Psycho 2. Yeah. Like I said, as was written by Tom Holland. Starring Meg Tilly and, of course, Anthony Perkins and Vera Miles returning from the original Psycho. Just an excellent, excellent sequel that I feel even has better suspense than the original Psycho. Dare I say that? But I really feel that way. I'm not saying it's as good as the original Psycho overall, but I think it's got better suspense, and I feel like it keeps you guessing a lot more than the original Psycho. And what an amazing cast, great cast, awesome performances all the way around. Anthony Perkins is brilliant. The direction of the film is brilliant. Awesome, awesome sequel. Number 7 is, what is the most underrated death scene in a horror film? I bet you guys can really come up with some good ones on this. I'd like to see it. And I'm going to pick one from Dario Argento's Tenebrae. And that's one you don't really hear too much about Tenebrae when it comes to horror. And I think it's an awesome, awesome movie, and it's got some brutal-ass death scenes. And the one I'm talking about is the death of Jane, when you see her going towards this window, and you see the glass window smash, and an axe come down, and it cuts her arm right off, and you see the blood spraying all over the wall, and she falls down, and she gets axed again. Oh man, it's just vicious. So yeah, I'm going with Tenebrae on that one. Number 8 is, what is the most underrated soundtrack or score in a horror film? And I'm going to go with the legendary Night of the Living Dead on that one. Yeah, it's an iconic masterpiece that so many people love. But not that many people talk about the soundtrack of Night of the Living Dead, which I feel is just absolutely phenomenal, It's so loud, it's so in your face, and I feel like it's just is overpowering, and I feel like it just drives the movie and makes it that much scarier. It's so intense. Dun, 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 dun. It's just awesome. I absolutely love it. Number 9 is going to be, what is the most underrated horror film of all time? So yeah, that's the big one. Save the biggest one for last. And guess what? Day of the Dead. That's my pick. The most underrated horror film of all time. Yeah, because Night of the Living Dead gets so much love. Dawn of the Dead gets so much love. I feel like Day of the Dead just kind of gets lost in the shuffle, I feel like people think it's vastly inferior to the first 2 films, and I don't agree with that. I think it's an excellent movie. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's a zombie masterpiece. Yes, it isn't quite as good as Night of the Living Dead or Dawn of the Dead, but those are the greatest zombie movies ever made. So yeah, but I think this is right there with it. It's just an awesome movie. I love it. I love Day of the Dead. It's brilliant. Some people might say it's better, but those people are kind of in the minority, I think. But yeah, Day of the Dead for me is the most underrated horror film of all time. Alright guys, that's it for the most underrated horror tag. So now I'm going to tag a bunch of people, so I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this. Anyone can feel free to do this tag, but I'm going to tag these particular people. I'm going to tag Boogeyman Ben, Derek's Horror Corner, Dave Maggot, Bronco Juggalo Talks Movies, Jen's Reviews from the Grave, TheHorrorMan, The Horror Miser, Monty G, and Movie Review Time. So guys, answer the call and do the most underrated horror tag. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.